Hi, and welcome to another edition of Strategic Business Insights. Today we're going to talk about terrorism and the root causes of terrorism. Now look, any society has a group within it that is disenfranchised, the disenfranchised citizens within a society. And they always lash out against the source of their perceived injustice. Okay, so there's some percentage, right? It's not 100% and it's not 0%. Some percentage of every society is disenfranchised. Okay, they're not doing well. Their life is not going the way they want. Okay, and they will lash out at the source of their perceived injustice, right? Who's most likely to lash out and be disenfranchised? Well, it's the youth, the young people. The young people are underemployed and bored and financially frustrated. It's a worse combination. Underemployed and bored. That is a source of problem, particularly for young males. Okay, we had any country that has a baby boom, right? United States had a baby boom as well after World War II. When that baby boom, a huge cluster of young people was in their late teens to early 20s, what happened? We had protests all over the United States, right? So the young people, mainly the men, right? They're full of testosterone, right? 15 to 25, let's say. Okay, they're full of testosterone. They're underemployed. They're bored, and they're financially frustrated. That is a recipe for problems. Okay, now what's happening right now? Well, we've got, frankly, a baby boom in almost the entire Muslim world, because Muslims have more babies than Western people for the most part. Or actually they do, you can look at any Muslim country, they have tons of bigger families, okay? So you have more young people, there's a big baby boom going on. Youth bulge, what they call a youth bulge. So you've got all this young energy, they're generally underemployed. Now the ones who have jobs, right, just like any other faith-based, Christian or Judaism, Buddhism or whatever, it doesn't, if you're having a job, you have a job, things are going well, you have an incentive to keep things going, right? You want society to continue the way it is. That's the same in the Muslim world as it is in the Western world. But the disenfranchised, it's the ones that don't have jobs, the ones that are frustrated, those are the most susceptible to the extremist elements, right? And they will lash out to the source of their perceived injustice. And who tells them about the sources of their perceived injustice? Well, it's the clerics. On Friday prayers. Friday in the Muslim world is like Sunday in the Western world. It's the day of prayer. It's the day of rest. Okay, so they have prayers, Friday morning prayers. And these clerics, for the most part, lash out against the Western world and against the United States in particular as being the source of their perceived injustice. So let's take a closer look at what those perceived injustices actually are. Number one, Israel. Israel is seen as the biggest crime in human history in the Muslim world, right? We need to understand that. We need to understand that that is their opinion. No one asked their permission to put Israel in the middle of the Middle East after World War II. No, the Western powers did that on their own. They basically stole land, gave it to Israel as a Jewish state, and now it's a Jewish state. Only Jews can vote, because obviously Palestinians, being Muslims, they have more children than Israelis, and so if you let the Palestinians vote, then in a generation or two, you would immediately lose your democracy, because there's so many more Palestinians than Israelis. So that's perceived as an injustice. The settlements, they're expanding these settlements in occupied territories that have never been acknowledged by any international law. All those settlements are illegal by international, all the international associations or whatever, like NATO and the UN. Those are all illegal settlements. Of course, Israel denies this. But again, we have to understand that in the Arab world, that is seen as a supreme injustice. Okay. Secondly, democracy they do not like democracy. Democracy, over a period of time, votes in progressively more liberal policies. Happens in all democracies. Right now, across the Western world, gay rights, gay marriage, it's all over the place. People are starting to vote it in. Public opinion is swaying, increasingly more liberal. I'm not saying gay rights are right or wrong. That's not what this video is about. The point is that over a period of time, same thing's true with women's rights a few decades ago, right? Over time, democracies vote in increasingly more liberal policies, right? In the Muslim world, in Sharia or whatever, they've drawn a line in the sand. And they do not want democracy to vote out that law. That law is that law, and they want to stick to it, okay? So they view democracy as being infidels. We are voting in ungodly policies from their view. Again, I'm not saying this is right or wrong. This is an attempt to help us all understand what's really going on. So they think we are infidel. They think we are evil, right? We are voting in like women's rights or whatever, or gay rights or gay marriage or whatever it might be. Those are ungodly policies that should not be voted in. Meanwhile, they're being voted in. We are infidels, okay? Thirdly, the oil trade. We are pumping oil from under their feet. And here's the problem. Again, think about the young, underemployed, bored males, right? 15 to 25. And they're bored, they don't have a job in many cases, or they're underemployed, they're not making as much money as they would like. Things are not going that well. And meanwhile, just a mile or two down the road, they can see these incredible glistening towers that were made by the profits of the oil trade. The oil trade, they're selling the oil to the infidels, okay? And their own rulers are getting rich while they have nothing. Seriously, just put yourself in their shoes. How frustrating is that? There are people in their own country, in other words, America, and the demand of Western nations for oil is perpetuating corruption in their own country. Right? They hate that. They hate the injustice is right in their face. Right? They see it every day. The opulence that's just outside of their reach because their own leaders are selling oil to the infidels. Right? Huge injustice. And what's the fourth one? The drone strikes. Right? These drone strikes, now, there's a couple of, there's a lot of misinformation. The drone strikes are extraordinarily effective. They are very, very effective, and civilian casualties are very, very low. But do you think the media in the Muslim world says that? Absolutely not. The media in the Muslim world will take anyone they can that says 4 women and 8 children were killed, whether it's true or not. They will run the story because they know that that's what the people want to hear. Their media is biased just like our media is biased. Our media is biased. I have a video on that. It's very biased. But the Muslim media is equally biased. And so they say these drone strikes are killing tons of civilians. It's not true. It's not true. I mean, I'm sure there are some, and I don't know the specifics, clearly, okay? But drone strikes are extraordinarily effective. But we are violating their sovereignty and shooting missiles at militants. Imagine if someone was flying drones over Oakland and killing, like, young black gang members or something like that. I mean, imagine the outcry that we would have. Let's say Canada. Let's say Canada was flying drones over top of our cities and firing missiles at gang members in inner cities. I mean, imagine the injustice and what the United States would do in return. Meanwhile, we're doing this. The United States is doing this in Pakistan and in Yemen, and I think in Somalia as well, and there's other places. Okay, so we are violating their sovereignty and shooting missiles and killing militants. Okay, they hate drone strikes. Okay, so there's a lot of sources of injustice, right? Israel, which America supports, democracy in general, which America is basically the figurehead for, the corruption in their own society that's driven by the oil trade, and finally the drone strikes, which are a violation of their sovereignty. So is it any surprise that now listen, there's no justification for terrorism. There is no justification for terrorism, for killing innocent civilians. But we can't be surprised that it's happening, right? Even in their own faith base, in the Koran, there are some verses which can be led to suggest that killing non-believers in the name of Allah makes you a martyr and guarantees your spot in the afterlife. Okay, so there's no surprise. We need to understand these elements if we're going to deal with them. We need to understand what their truer conflicts really are. Bottom line is, terrorism is extraordinarily effective. They're not spending a lot of money, and meanwhile, we are spending billions and billions and billions of dollars to protect ourselves against terrorism. So it's an effective strategy. And it's also important for us to know that this Muslim, non-Muslim conflict is happening all over the world. right? I mean, just recently, the Boston bombers, that was a Muslim-inspired act. The snipers in Washington a few years ago, that was a Muslim-inspired act. The guy down in Texas who shot those officers in the army base, that he was Muslim and was angry and basically a jihadist, if you will. The riots in east of Paris a couple of years ago, that was in Muslim neighborhoods. The same thing was happening in Sweden just recently in their Muslim districts. The murder in the UK was Muslim inspired. The conflict in Chechnya is Muslim, non-Muslim. This is happening, Palestinian and Israeli, this is happening all over. South Sudan versus North Sudan. All these are the same conflict, okay? It's the same basic grievance set. So we need to understand that this is a trend. The media doesn't like to say it. The media doesn't like to say this, but we need to understand what the problem is if we're ever going to solve it. Hopefully this video has given you some insight to help you understand it better. Thanks for watching. My name's Patrick, reminding you as always to think bigger about your business. Think bigger about your life.